Hi, everyone. I'm Professor Hamamoto. It is June 21st, year 2022, 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Welcome, everybody, in the live stream and on the recorded feed, the refeed as well. I have a lot of material to cover, and it's dedicated, this material today, and it'll probably carry over into Thursday. It's a tribute to Shame Month, right? Shame Month for shameful behavior. And I'm not talking about the rainbow wigs and the makeup and obese males, so called drag queen. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the shameful behavior towards children and their mothers, who are women, right? They are women. They are genetically women, biologically women. That is the shame that I'm referring to. It's the shame of the ultimate in misogyny and sexism, right? Misogyny meaning against women. That's what the transgender movement represents politically, biologically, biopolitically. And that is why it's a scourge. And that's why all this fun and games that you hear, like someone, I hate to mention names, but he's just so irritating. This braying jackass, Owen Schroyer, info, all these guys, and Stu, the auctioneer, and Bencher, all those people who are ostensibly on our side are sucking oxygen out of the real resistance to a biopolitical threat to our species by making fun of them and calling them names and showing clips. Look at the stupid fat man and blah, 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 right? So, for those of you who accidentally are watching this show from those channels, you're just slumming it. Well, this should make you happy. We're going to talk about Tinkerbells and Evil Queens. This is about the Disney Corporation by Sean Griffin. I assume that he or her is an academic. Yeah, but this is an academic study of how the Disney Corporation, with consultants from the academic world, right? You think that they're meaningless, that they're just a bunch of nutty professors? This is how it's usually played on our supposed independent conservative media. They just make fun of them and call them names, and oh, it's a useless degree, and why do you want to spend your money going to the University of Texas? Blah blah blah. Hey, well, you know what? If we don't take back these institutions now, then as a species, no exaggeration, we are doomed. And I'm not just talking about GMO, genetically modified organisms. I'm talking about extinction. All right, that is the end game. So for those of you who are slumming, stay tuned. And that's why I put the graphic up here. It's Pat, 1994, I believe. Some of you may have seen the movie. It stars Julia Sweeney, really entertaining, talented actor, comedian, performer. I haven't seen it, and I think she's been in a few movies besides It's Pat. But this was based on, as some of you may remember, the routine that started out on that PSYOP show run by the Canadian Lorne Michaels. It's called Saturday Night Live, right? And I don't know, she was in the third, fourth generation cast, and before it really began to go downhill. But anyway, she made an incredible film. I think she wrote most of it here, Julia Sweeney. And I have a Julia Sweeney story to tell you, to share with you. I wrote Julia Sweeney because this is years ago, right? I've been on the beat for years now. And just for those of you who are new to this channel, it was me, it was Professor Hamamoto who went on the Alex Jones show. This is almost 10 years ago, and warned them about the LGBT, I think it was at that time, they added letters later, agenda and what it meant for us politically. And I don't think they fully comprehended what I was saying, because they just insist on just running clips of bearded men in public libraries prancing around, and that's supposed to solve a problem. It's not. You're just giving them more attention. It's like calling attention to a shooter at a school, right? You're just feeding it. They're loving it, and you're falling right into their trap. So today I'm going to break it down. I'm going to get into the real deep metaphysical roots that even the opponents of what is taking place here, there's a growing number of them in academia. I was the first one to go public about it, right? And I had to go outside the academic confines and publishers and journals because none of them would touch Professor Hamamoto. I'm a renegade. I'm not telling you just to feel sorry. I'm just saying I'm that I come from this from the standpoint of experience, not just something that I read about on saw on YouTube or read about it on some website, right? So anyway, I wrote to Julia Sweeney. This is years ago, and this is when I was still at UC Davis. And I was, by the way, I should tell you, I'm one of the pioneers in sexuality studies, and I went into it because I saw how it was being hijacked and taken over by the queer. They called them queer at the time. Queer theorists, and it was an outgrowth of so-called women's studies. Not so much an outgrowth, but a subversion and a hijacking of the women's movement, which started out organically as being a very important one for women and men and all human beings in America and perhaps over the world. But of course, corporations are very savvy. They hire the top behavioral scientists at Yale, Johns Hopkins, Stanford University, Harvard, to figure out how they can use these organic movements and turn it back against the people who founded them. This also happened in ethnic studies, which I also pioneered. And any independent movie, they figure out ways to turn it around and control it. And usually, it's very simple. People are motivated by money and status, and that's really all you have to do. You have to create some, let's say, for example, these are not abstract examples. You have to create endowed chairs at the university for gender studies, right? And you have to put it at the University of California, and you have to put Judith Butler in it. And that means she gets to handpick all her grad students. We'll get her off the screen here. I'll finish the story. Here's Judith Butler over at UC, University of California, Berkeley. And I name checked her early on, and people, my colleagues, said, "God, you're calling out Judith Butler. You're finished, Jack." Speaking of Jack, here's another Jack. Here's another one of the major theorists of what we're seeing today playing out. This is no joke. This is no time to name call and to make fun of Trigglypuff or to idolize that great distraction, Milo Yiannopoulos, all these people. You know, we all want to pretend that we're so accepting and gay friendly, as the phrase goes. But this is a serious move, a Jack move to eliminate the human species. Again, no exaggeration. Here's another one, Andrea Dworkin. She has gone to the great beyond. Probably she's being judged in hell somewhere. And she wrote a provocative book called Intercourse, which claimed that all sex between men and women constitutes rape. And there you go. You see the abasement, the remaking, the Kabbalistic remaking of words, word magic, a la Crowley, and on and on. And I mentioned Kabbalah or Kabbalah not gratuitously, not just in passing, because we're going to return to these figures and to my original insight here, right now, June 21st. It has not been written about, spoken, uttered, whispered, or it's been hinted at if you've been watching my earlier shows. But I'm going to bring all the threads together to show you how what's taking place today is a outgrowth of a movement that some of you might have heard of, and there's a lot of writing about it online and some Wikipedia and YouTube. There's tons of material, and some of it's quite good. And some of it comes from authoritative sources, but most of it's just rehashed material that you see on independent media, right? Not that I'm a scholar of it. I don't read Hebrew and I don't read Latin, and I only read haltingly, a couple of modern languages, because this is a serious area of study that requires full-time scholarship and dedication on understanding Greek antiquity, Samaria, Babylon, and the Turkic or Ottoman Empire, as well as Central European history. All of that really comes to bear here. And by the way, I'm not just mentioning this for the sake of establishing my bona fides. I'm mentioning this because if we get undergraduates studying in these areas, it's going to naturally push out so-called gender studies and push out critical race theory. Those two major, and they're related, they're joined at the hip. CRT, as it's abbreviated in so-called gender studies. I say so-called because this concept of gender we're going to talk about, it's fallacious, it's synthetic, it's made up. It was pioneered by a guy named John Money. Yeah, he's another British asset. He comes from New Zealand. He's a Five Eyes dude. Like Elon Musk. You notice they're either coming from Canada or they're coming from South Africa or New Zealand or Australia. And America is the big cornucopia, the great wealth, the great political power, and also the humanity, right? The tradition of freedom and liberty that we have demonstrated to the rest of the world. This is why partly we're under attack. And one of the tools, one of the weapons that are being pulled out of the trick bag of the globalists, and these are bankers, and by the way, they're of all different religions. Some of them are from China. Some of them are in Tokyo Toll. They're Japanese. I don't know what their religion. They're probably secret Freemasons, which I hope to get into. I'm going to talk about Freemasonry in Asia in particular, and Japan in specific. But so lest you think that this is going to be an exercise in Jew bashing or anti-Semitism, let me tell you, you're barking up the wrong tree here, right? And that's, by the way, one of the protective hedges that are set up whenever you broach this topic. But you can't do that to me because I've done the work, I've done the homework, and let me just show you very quickly. This is not to parade my knowledge, but just because these are written by presumably they are Jews themselves, Andrei Orlov, Dark Mirrors, right? These are scholarly books, State University of New York. These are academic books. Azazel and Satan El in Early Jewish Demonology. You got the Littman Library of Jewish Civilization. This is David Halberstam, and it's published by Liverpool University, another academic press. It's on Zabbatai Zev, which we'll talk about. Subtitled Testimonies to a Fallen Messiah. He's a fake Messiah. So when we talk about Sabbatean Frankists, like a Yakub or Jacob Frank, we're not talking about Judaism. As we know, we're talking about a heresy. All right? So all the Jew baiters out there, turn to another channel or something, because that's not where I'm going with this, right? And this is a classic. This is foundational. Gershom Scholem, The Origins of Kabbalah. Right, he was a German Jewish scholar who later immigrated to Israel, the new state of Israel. And by the way, he wanted to take his friend with him, but he had tuberculosis. You know who his good friend was? Yes, Franz Kafka. Franz Kafka, the writer, right? Oh, it's so Kafkaesque. Oh, yeah, The Castle, The Trial, the short stories, all of those, right? He's ended the line. He was buddies with Gershom Scholem, who was also, most of these guys were radicals. They're communists, all right, or Zionists or nationalists. But they also had the background, the training in mysticism. And then finally, before we move on, Pawlo Machiko, he's really good. I'm mispronouncing. I think he's Polish Jewish. The Mixed Multitude. Jakob Frank and the Frankist Movement, 1755 to 1816. Wow, this is over 200 years ago, 2 centuries. Who said history is history? History is going on right now. Okay, you probably figured out, the people who watch my talks have figured this out already. You know that I'm including as part of the contemporary Sabbatean Frankist movement is characters like this, right? They're all Jews, but they're not really. They're Frankist Sabbateans. They probably don't, they're all atheists, but one thing they have in common is they're all communist. They're red diaper babies. Their grandparents came from Central Europe to escape the pogroms, right? And I understand that and persecution against you. I get it. But you're an American now. This is the refuge. I won't say it's the promised land, but it's a lot better than running from the czar's troops, right? And you're not going to get communism here in America. And you knew that. That's why you stopped with your communist propaganda and your Marxism of the 30s and the Rosenbergs, all 30s, 40s, and 50s, and through the 60s, because it wasn't getting a foothold amongst the American people. The minorities, by the way, and among the Asian American community, there are a hardcore group of Maoists, and they're based in San Francisco, and they run people like Nancy Pelosi, and I know every one of your names, and you run the cultural institutions, and you're also down in Los Angeles, and you run the Asian American arts scene down there, and you run the independent cinema and the film, and you're also in the corporate world and the foundation world, and you're also in New York City. You're also in this is my ostensive group, and that's why I walked away from Asian American studies, because which I was, by the way, a second generation pioneer in bringing it forward. And I saw all these different demonic forces coming in to pick at our bones once we've established it. Once you build a house, they say, thank you very much for your service. Get out of here. It's our house now. We're going to move in. We're going to own you. And I said, no, I can't let that happen. So this is what happened. This is what happened in the case of the traditional leftists, who mainly were Polish, Eastern European, Hungarian Jews that migrated to their grandparents migrated to the U.S. and they were going to make revolution here in America. And even other Jews said, no, man, we don't want that. We don't want. They're called red diaper babies. By the way, I had a lot of professors like that. Stanley Aronowitz. They weren't all Jews, but they were like from the 20s and 30s. Their parents were radical, and these also were. This is Hollywood. Hollywood was full. That's why the Red Scare came up in Hollywood, red channels and television and film, because all these leftists had gone in there and they were purged. Now, I'm not calling for a purge here, not at all. I say we need these people here to remind us. So long as you have me to help break it down, and there'll be others who are going to be doing this. I'm just happen to be cutting edge on most of these areas. And this is the Sabbatean connection and the Frankist connection is my intervention, that people who are waking up to CRT and LGBTQ have not fully realized, because they are materialists and they are secularists. I'm not saying being secular and being non-denominational is bad, but they have a better way of putting it is that they have no appreciation of the metaphysical. They have no appreciation of the spiritual. And I'm not saying in terms of a given religion. I'm talking about people who have a strictly philosophical materialist understanding to social institutions, literature, sports, or whatever. So their default position, these are leftists now, and we'll talk about two of them in specific. These are leftists who blame everything on capitalism, because that's something you can see and touch, and you can look out the door and there's poverty and there's inequality and racism and sexism. And that still exists, contrary to what some people would want to argue. But they cannot really fathom, they cannot admit into their critique the idea that a political and a social movement called Sabbateanism is alive and well in 2022, and it's being manifested in CRT and so-called gender studies, because the Marxist revolution did not happen. By the way, all these groups, they try to recruit Black radicals. They try to recruit Latino. I had a couple of them in grad school. There's Raúl Fernandez, who ironically was from a Cuban refugee family. He became a Maoist. And then Gilberto Gonzalez, who was a Chicano radical. It was, and all the different groups were being proselytized, but it didn't work. So they said, well, what next? Okay, we're going to go queer. And I saw this happening at this journal that was used to be called Socialist Revolution. This is sort of like new left politics. We're going to overthrow capitalism, but again, it wasn't really taking root amongst everyday people. They thought, oh my gosh, it's going to be like Norma Ray. Everybody's going to jump up and say, union, union, now union. It's never going to happen. It's not in America. And by the way, I'm not letting off the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and their latter day manifestations, the Musks and these people, and the Thiels and the Omidars of today, the current day capitalist oligarchs. I'm not letting them off the hook, but because you know what? They're the ones who are funding these people. They're the ones who are setting up these endowed chairs at the university to placate and to pacify the population under the guise of some sort of radical transformation that's taking place. And that's the great irony in this whole CRT gender fluidity movement, so-called drag queen pride month, is that ultimately not only is it conservative, but it's pro-globalist and pro-corporatist and pro-capitalist. But do they care? No, because people operate under prestige and money. Right. And the capitalists, they'll give you that endowed chair. They own the universities. They're on the board of regents or the corporation, if it's Harvard or Yale or Brown University. We'll get to Brown in a moment. And they've got tons of money because they have all kinds of side action in the parallel economy. You and me, who are wage slaves and salary slaves and on so-called Social Security, that's our economy. But the movers and shakers have their own gig going on. I think I I treated it in previous talks a few months ago when I went in on 007 James Brown and the Caribbean and the old Panama Papers, which revealed a good deal about not a good deal, reveals a lot about the true economy, while this ceremonial economy is being imploded by one of their puppets, the part of the father-son incest team of Biden and Biden, right? By the way, some of you didn't really quite get that point after the last talk. That's an important insight there. And mark my words, that is going to be revealed at one point. This has less to do with prophecy. It has more to do with my being able to understand and see and discern patterns in human behavior and society historically. And I have it registered under the trademark of cultural forensics, but it is a process of analytical breakdown and extrapolation. And a lot of it's common sense. And anyway, please rethink it. Ponder it. I know it's really horrific to think about that, but consider it as a possibility. I mean, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, Creepy Joe, as he's been called. I'm not going to belabor the point, but the larger emphasis here is that those people there are also a distraction. So let's try to dig a little bit deeper. All right. Okay. Just so you know, the contradictions of CRT and gender fluid and Gay Pride Month is not, well, I'm skipping ahead here. Let me move to what stimulated this, inspired this talk in the first place. I was listening to a couple of leftists, Matt Taibbi, who seemed to have a conventional background, and I don't think he was too much of a leftist when he was starting out as a writer, but I think he was getting some positive strokes, so to speak, saying, yeah, Matt Taibbi, you're going to be our guy. And he started writing these articles, very knee-jerk leftist type articles for the globalist publication called Rolling Stone. And then I used to see him on Democracy Now!, right? When I still had cable television, that was on the cable channel. It's a leftist channel. And by the way, there's a lot of crossover between leftist critique and so-called conservative libertarian. There's a great deal of commonality there. So I don't dismiss Amy Goodman and some of these other people offhand. Oh, they're, again, it's the name calling. Oh, they're communists, they're socialists, blah, blah, blah. They're Marxist, or they're cultural Marxist, right? That's not very fruitful. Anyway, so I was listening to a podcast by Matt Taibbi, and he was interviewing a practicing attorney by the name of Kara Dansky. All right. And she was talking about how she had become anathema. She was put on the leftist blacklist because she was just in casual conversation questioning the obsession and the mischaracterization of male female identities or relationships, not romantic, but just man versus woman, female versus male. And first, they would let her ride. While you're attorney, you need to study Judith Butler and Andrea Dworkin and Jack Halberstam. And there's Judith. Did I say Judith Butler already? There's Judith not Halberstam. There's a couple of other biggie names there. I couldn't put them all up here. I can only put 10 graphics up there at the time. But there's a core of them that are canonical. Every grad student that get to study with these people, or some of these second tier universities, state universities, and the community colleges, they get their PhDs from these bigger schools. They're going to get it through the osmosis, right? They're going to have these canonical writers pushed down their throat, and it becomes normalized. So I was listening to Matt Taibbi interview this woman who had been ostracized by the law community. She wasn't getting any referrals or commission. I don't know if you could call it commission. She wasn't getting any business. She's a criminal attorney, and one of her areas of interest is prison law or criminal law that has to do with imprisonment, incarceration. She's a leftist. She's a liberal. Dansky, her parents were probably liberals. Maybe her parents were some of were Polish Jews who were running away, to America so that they would not be thrown in prison or killed or have their heads cut off, right? So that's Kara Dansky. So she grew up. She's a red diaper baby. So what was really amazing is that these people's critique are very much like ours, but they were so intent on maintaining their left liberal credentials that they said, oh man, I can't believe that I'm beginning to depart from the orthodoxy that I learned at the university, and I feel like I'm betraying the women's movement. Well, you know what? The women's movement has betrayed you. The women's movement has betrayed women. The women's movement has abandoned women. Now they see women as the enemy, especially if they're quote unquote heteronormative. And even the lesbians who are not militant, the so-called lipstick lesbians, who I get along with famously, it's the bull dykes who really hate me because we're competing for the same women, right? So that's why whenever they look at me, they want to tear my head off. Right, and just see the stump of my neck spurting blood. I get that kind of vibe from these people, man. And they usually have a really good-looking girlfriend too. They look like Jack Halberstam, but they're pick a star in Hollywood, but their girlfriends look like some kind of movie star, right? Go figure, right? So long as they don't lay a finger on me, that's cool, right? But hey, if you want gender equality, you lay a hand on me, you're going to get one. You're going to get a hand back from me. It's going to be a naked chokehold, and then I'm going to make you tap out on the ground. Kimura, it's called, yeah. By the way, I mentioned that is because I think a really good form, a positive form of female empowerment is mixed martial arts. Watch that on YouTube and watch the women kick ass. And these are all the little demure Oriental girls, the women, from the Philippines, from South Korea, from Hawaii, from Japan, right? They're really good. And Thailand, of course, right? That to me is going to drive out critical race theory and gender fluidity theory, right? So anyway, Kara Dansky said, oh yeah, I wrote a book and it's called, I have to get it, of course. Thank you, Patreons. You're the ones who keep me in business. I got the book right away as soon as I heard it. By the way, I posted that interview on my Patreon, so you're getting all the backstory. You're getting the evolution of these talks, how I develop them, and you heard the interview with Dansky and Matt Taibbi, both avowed liberals who are so ashamed that they're beginning to agree with the conservatives. And by myself, I don't identify with any group, conservative, radical, whoever. I'm more eclectic, and I'm not doctrinaire. I'm not dogmatic. That's what I'm saying. So she wrote a book called The Abolition of Sex. I have great expectations of it, but you could watch a couple of Jordan Peterson, the PSYOP dude from Canada, or the ass clown from Portland. And say both these guys, by the way, were put out there to blunt my influence, because like I told you, I went public from academia almost 10 years ago on the Alex Jones show, right? So, whereas I think Owen Schroyer is a braying jackass who's got nothing to say, the show itself is very important. I just hope they would bring more depth to the discussion instead of name calling and putting up videos of rainbow wigged, bearded trannies, I guess you could call them. Anyway, so the book is okay for starters, and if any leftists read it, I think it's a good entry point. But there are some women who uh, years ago have already started calling out this fallacious notion of gender and an old gender studies mafia that's taken over the university. And people thought, oh, it's okay. It's just a bunch of professors of comparative literature or English or maybe history, sociology. But all you people in biology and chemistry and physics who thought that, hey, I'm a scientist, that's not my thought, or I'm in the business school. Guess what? It's already hit you. It's already hit your particular area, because again, this is a comprehensive, unified attack of destroying the human species. And that, of course, includes undermining the very foundations of science and technology, the epistemologies that undergird everything that is wonderful, beautiful, and brilliant about human existence for the last 10,000 years in particular, right? Or more specifically, the last 500 years. It's been incredible what human beings have been able to accomplish. So anyway, I'm seeing here a gradual transformation from on the part of leftists. So let's not call them names. Let's welcome them into the reality that we've already figured out, and already we're experiencing, living, espousing, and trying to maintain and to grow. Let's welcome to this them to this world, which is the world of reality, not fabricated terms like gender. And that's what Dansky keeps talking about. Oh, that's a fiction. It doesn't really. Yeah, it is a fiction, but the world runs on fiction. Did she ever hear about WB and CW and Netflix and gosh, Harry Potter and all these other? Those are fictions. She's a lawyer by training, right? How about the word corporation? How about the term corporation is a fiction? It's a legal fiction. So saying that gender is a fiction and therefore needs to be thrown away is unrealistic, because it is being used. It's already been institutionalized. These are some of the key mafiosi who have been endowed with tons of money and prestige by the corporatists that these people don't really understand. They don't fully, and that's okay. That's my function, right? I have a role to play in this, and that's to fill out the discussion. Now, before I leave Dansky and Taibbi behind, this is what really vex them. It's this book. See, thank you, Pastor Rounds. As soon as I hear the books, I gotta run out and buy them from the retailer that ate the world. And by the way, Kirby Summers' book is available now. We had a great interview there. And it's Patreon. You're gonna see this show up there. I'll give you all the information on publication. But I got this thanks to your help. It's called "What Is a Woman?" And they were really mad. Taibbi and Dansky were mad that this guy writes for the Daily Wire and he's quote unquote conservative, right? She's, we're so angry that the Daily Wire, this writer here, Matt Walsh, really broke it down for us, right? And again, it's a good, I would advise any parent who has children, adult children at the university or college, just kind of slip this into their backpack and say, listen, Junior, you're not alone. Not all the people that you're studying with in sociology, history, women's studies, literature, and now in the sciences and in business school, or if they're in professional, law school, they're not all on board, and the consensus is beginning to fracture. Right? You know what my strategy is. It's the Zatoichi strategy. Find the cracks, find the dissension, and work those so that the whole facade will break down. So slip this into their backpack, and they'll feel less alone. They'll know that there are people who understand what's taking place, and show them this video and tell them, hey, there was someone who got kicked out of the University of California because 15 years ago he was already calling out what was going to be happening here. Because this is all part of the New World Order takeover, the destruction of gender. It's part and the intelligence agencies that we all know and hate and have read about. It's all of a piece here. This is a manifestation of everything that people who are watching. It's a manifestation of a lot of what you already know, but you're not recognizing it as such, as being continuous with the New World Order, bloodlines of the Illuminati, everything you read about the Sabbatean Frankists, the Freemason, all that knowledge is not going to go to waste. It's really the foundational material for what I'm talking about today. So you know what? That automatically leaves out the left. That leaves out your Danskys because they don't reckon it. They just think that's conspiracy theory. That leaves out your Matt Taibbis. There are a couple of leftists, however, who are very much aware. One of them is a friend of mine, Doug Kellner, who's at UCLA. He understands all that, but he remains a Marxist, a leftist, a new Marxist, a really intelligent one. But he's the exception. Most of them are little ducklings who were exposed to Gramsci or one of the other icons, the new Marxist, or George Lukács in grad school, and they just stuck with it. Right? It's like you're in the priesthood. You learn the catechism, and it was so difficult understanding the intellectual history and the concepts that you're going to hang onto it for the rest of your life, even though it doesn't bear any relationship to reality. It happens even in the sciences, right? You still got people arguing that the Earth is flat, right? You hear them all, and I had them on my show here because my job is to take a look at everything that's going on around me because I'm interested. I want to understand what this is all about as well. And by the way, I think a lot of flat Earth and the UFO stuff it's not my original insight. I think a lot of it's coming from the intelligence agencies as well. Muddy the water, right? Just create chaos, order out of chaos. Isn't that their motto? All right. So, see, so check out the book. It's worth your while. It's very simple. It's for a non-specialist. All right. Let me move on to and I'm going to skirt over it because I already talked about him in a previous presentation. That's Hugo Gernsback. His real name was Gernsbacher, and again, he's like their grandfather, right? He's the grandfather of Judith Halberstam and Andrea Dworkin and Judith Butler. He came a generation early, like like their grandparents came. He was like at the turn of the century, so he was like the original. But he was an educated Jew. He was not in the rag trade or a peddler or in the clothing trade, right? These are entry level type jobs for the Jewish working class in America. The majority of them, they were they were the German Jews who looked down, by the way, at the Central European Jews. They called them Yids, right? The Yid, calling a working class Jew from Poland or Hungary or Russia calling them a Yid was not something that the Gentiles came up with. That was something that the German Jews came up with because they didn't want their daughters to marry one. Right. One of them was Fanny. She's a writer. I forgot her name. Uh, she came from a German Jewish family, and his family was very disappointed that she married, quote unquote, a Yid. Right. So these were their grandparents were Yids, right? And they had a boner about that, and the rest of the world is suffering for it. And uh, more than that, they had a ideology to hang their hat on, and it's called transgenderism, gender fluidity, critical gender theory, critical race theory. All right. So let me move on to just to show you that, and that's Gernsbacher, by the way. And I mentioned I returned to Gernsbacher because I want to establish a hypothesis for you. And I think I might have alluded to it earlier. I forgot in the previous presentation about science fiction. But I suspect that he also was a Sabbatean Frankist of these people's generation, their grandparents' generation, right? Judith Butler might not even know who Zabbatai Zev is, but her grandparents probably did. I bet you anything, especially if they were Yiddish speaking or Polish, and they brought the old country with them to the United States, and their granddaughters are repackaging the Sabbatean Frankist ideology, which is millennialist, by the way. It's destructive, and it's a heresy. It's not Judaism as you and I would know it, but it's a heresy to bring back the Messiah through transgression of all sorts of vile activity, including pedophilia, right? Sleeping with the rabbi's wife, group sex, orgies, voyeurism, peeping Tom, cheating, lying, stealing, murder, ritual sacrifice. That is part of the Sabbatean heresy that's in this book. And interestingly enough, because I was revisiting this, you know the term sadomasochism, right? Well, there was a writer, his name is, and again, he's part of the Austro-Hungarian Sabbatean network, but he was German. I don't think he was even Jewish, but his name was Leopold von Sacher-Masoch. Sacher-Masoch. That's where the term sadomasochism was coined, because these sexologists, as like to call themselves, are really experts in coming up with new words, especially John Money. And he has a whole section on Zabbatai Zev. Here it is, published in 1886. So it's a thing, definitely. He wrote a book called Venus and Furs, all these early erotic, quote unquote, transgressive texts. I'm using their term. They love transgression. Right. The Sabbatean Franks, or the people who were opponents of Zabbatai Zev. And that, by the way, was mostly the majority of the rabbis of Poland or Hungary. There was always a head rabbi and his assistants, his followers there. But the reason why they didn't really call them out too thoroughly or too aggressively is because they thought they should maintain group solidarity as Jews, even though it was destroying Judaism. Right, because the Catholics, the Roman Catholics, the other groups would see Jews in total as being responsible for all the problems that's going on in their society. So that's part of the psychology. I'm not going to dwell or delve too deeply into it at this point. But also you have writers like, who is it? Isaac Bashevis Singer, right? I don't know if he ever won the Nobel Prize for literature, but he's at that level. And I think he was writing in Yiddish, which was not considered a literary language. That's kind of revolutionary. He's a literary experimenter, like James Joyce on that level, right? That's Isaac Bashevis Singer. But he would write about his people, and one of them was the Zabbatai Zev. So it's part of the literature, right? And I'll go even further. I came up with this monster book by a woman named Marcia Keith Schuchard, because you might be asking the question, what does this have to do with literature and poetry and movies and music and lyrics and all that? Everything is the answer, because as Schuchard puts out, This is a incredible book, Masonic Rivalries and Literary Politics. There is a politics of literature. There's a politics of media, right? And that's why we're seeing Netflix. There's a politics of Netflix, and it's Sabbatean, Frankist politics, right? Bring back the Messiah now to by making the world such an abomination, right? Genetically modified human beings, crops, animals, right? Men dressed as women, women dressed as men, so-called intergenerational sex, used to be called pedophilia, being normalized, right? That will bring back the Messiah to the here and now when we're all going to go to heaven. We're going to go to Sabbatai Zev heaven. By the way, Yakub Frank and Sabbatai Zev, they wanted to pollute all the religions, not just Judaism. They converted to Islam. I think Joseph Frank, he wound up as a Roman Catholic. You know, Ignacio Loyola of the Society of Jesus, he came from Jews. His family bought him a priesthood, and they created the Jesuits. And then this is why we're not talking about a Jewish phenomenon. We're talking about a civilizational abomination that has reared its ugly head and manifests itself in 2022, right? It didn't stop at 1666, right? Where we talk about Zabbatai Zev. It's on, and these are the proponents, and they're just some of the people that I can fit in here in the small space I'm allotted. 10 picks only. Okay, let's move it out a little bit. One of the people that is castigated in this particular book, The Abolition of Sex, and a couple other ones that I come up, The Politics of Deviance. This one in particular, it's called, can you see it? Okay, if you pardon the F word, it's called Fuckology. And the subtitle is Critical Essays on John Money's Diagnostic Concepts. And this is John Money. So blame John Money because he came up with the concept of fuckology because he wanted to reform and to pollute and to change and transform the language himself. By the way, he worked closely with Alfred Kinsey, right? Kinsey was a notorious pedophile. He was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, right? He taught he was an entomologist, but he taught human sexuality, at the University of Indiana. And the Kinsey Institute's still there. There's the secret archives with all the films of all the sex he was having with his professional colleagues, his TAs, the grad students, undergraduates, barnyard animals, you name it. That's Kinsey. And this is John Money. And John Money is another British Five Eyes. It wasn't called Five Eyes back then. He's from New Zealand, and they brought him to Harvard, and he got training under. By the way, these are all people that I studied in grad school, and I was taught to hate this guy, Talcott Parsons, because he was the head of Harvard Department of Social Relations, right? And you know what? I didn't realize this. And we were taught to hate him because we were trained as Marxists. We were trained to be Marxists, right? And he was he was Harvard sociology. So and by the way, these are the people who are now established in academia and in law schools, and they're senior level people in state and federal and government, and some of them are incorporated. They're all leftists. They're part of the new left 60s generation who are like my age, boomers, who were trained to, and again, it's a false dialectic, to critique people like Talcott Parsons. I didn't realize this, but I just, even in this Wikipedia entry there, I see that he got his PhD at the London School of Economics. Hey, that says it all right there. That's British leftism, right? The LSE. Right, London School of where George Soros also got his PhD. So that's Talcott Parsons. So the Brits sent him over to Harvard so that he could train people like John Money, right, and say, yeah, we're going to attack him at the sexual level, at the financial level, and of course, more recently, we're being under attack through the genetic level, right? No longer just in nuclear warfare, but nucleus warfare, genetic, and the money's still flowing to people like my former colleague at UC Davis, right? What's his name? Peter, whoever, Peter Schill, who's pretending he's a whistleblower, right? He's pretending that even though his Chinese researchers did all the heavy lifting for him, he's the guy that supposedly invented mRNA, right? That guy, right? So they're attacking it as all these different levels, and this is all part of a piece. And this is the godfather. It's Talcott Parsons, a British agent at Harvard University. And that's something that I learned in preparing this. I mean, I knew his work because like I said, we studied him so that we could refute him as a doctoral student. We had to attack Talcott Parsons, the whole Harvard, the Chicago, all of them, with the understanding that Marxism is the solution to it. It's not. It's a false dialectic because they run both ends, right? You know that. Right, we have David Icke to thank by saying, "Hey, people, man, it's a false dialectic that we're putting out there." And for us to be spending so much time on transvestite library day or whatever and making fun of them, that's just feeding into their whole deal. So you got Talcott Parsons training John Money. And by the way, just very briefly, as I'm running out of time, John Money is the guy who coined the term gender. He's the godfather of this. And these are feminists. These are leftist feminists who are slamming John Money, but they want to preserve academic feminism. I'm saying these authors, you cannot have it both ways. You're going to have to repudiate academic feminism if you want to get rid of the damage wrought by John Money, who is a misogynist and a pedophile. He's dead now. Who is anti-woman and was a promoter of so-called intergenerational attraction. Even the leftists, and this is another one, just like Matt Taibbi and just like Kara Dansky, let's welcome them into the reality that you and I already share. But you're going to have to extirpate, that is, remove all the remnants of Sabbatean Frankists if we're going to move ahead, right? And that is John Money as well. John Money was also in the same program as this character. He was a professor there. Do you recognize him? That's Henry Murray, Professor Henry Murray in psychology, because the Department of Social Relations was quote unquote interdisciplinary. So they took all the best and brightest who were funded by OSS, later CIA, and the Carnegie and the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller, the usual suspects, and of course British intelligence were involved. And they put them in Harvard, all the big marquee schools, all the trademark schools, supposedly all the kids like J.D. Vance, and I got to get into Yale so I can be the first Hillbilly president, who is also a CIA asset, right? So that's Henry Murray. He was from psychology as part of the interdiscipline. By the way, John Money did not have a medical degree. He was a psychologist. He did not have a surgical degree or an experience in surgery. And I'm saying that because he was the guy that was advocating so-called gender reassignment. I have to be careful not to use their phraseology, their word magic. He was the guy that, and I'm using it now, he's the one that pioneered this idea that the efficacy of gender reassignment surgery, which is now becoming normalized. That's John Money. And he had a famous case with his patient named David Reimers, who later committed suicide because he became from a male to a female. And remember, it's Gernsback that was promoting this, the science fiction Gernsback, in his journal Sexology, right? Using Christine Jorgensen in the 1950s as the emblematic of what was going to happen in subsequent decades. So we have Dr. Henry Murray, Professor Henry Murray in psychology, and some of you might remember his name from the book by Alston Chase, a really good one, called Harvard and the Making of the Unabomber, because this character here, I'm sure you recognize him, don't you? That's none other than Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski is a precocious mathematical genius, precocious 16-year-old going to Harvard, was enrolled in a longitudinal study by Professor Henry Murray, right? He was studying him as a lab rat, but really Kaczynski was being controlled. By the way, I don't think Kaczynski ever ceased being controlled. He's being silenced. He's in prison now. He's pushing 80 now, right? And he's remained silent, and he's published some pretty solid books against technocratic society. But again, I think he's also being handled as part of the false dialectic. But you don't need me to tell you what the Unabomber is responsible for. There is a current series on Netflix, right? The Obama Network, right? Netflix, on the Unabomber through his own words, from his own journals and his own writings. I recommend it. Again, Netflix wants to see us, right? The handlers, the people behind Netflix, I should say, wants to see us exterminated. Netflix is part of this modeling, imprinting system to bring in the post-human world, right? So there's that. But if you can read against the grain, you're going to be able to benefit from it and understand what Kaczynski really represents. So this is all money. This is Talcott Parsons, who we were taught to hate and embrace leftism, Henry Murray, and our friend Ted Kaczynski, related, ironically, because these are all people who were influenced by John Money. They were all influenced, saying, John Money said, gender is a construct. It is an arbitrary performance, and performativity is one of their key terms. So whenever your sons and daughters at college, university hear that, that's a red flag that you have someone, that's almost everybody now, who has come under the sway of the LGBT queer mafia, the transgender, the post-human, biogenetic, bioengineered mafia at the university. And all you grad students who are out there who are name checking all these canonical figures, you're not going to have a career. You're not going to have a life. Most of you are already far gone to begin with. You've already submitted to the crisis of the past 2 years in order to remain in school, right? They said you've got to take the mark of the beast. I'm speaking in slightly coded terms here, right? So I would think you'd want payback. You know, they've ruined your life and your career, and you're not going to have, these people here have already occupied that space. They're already going to go out. They're going to rule in a new regime. Judith Butler, Jack Albert, they're not going to fill those positions with people who are in CRT or gay studies or queer studies or post-gender. They're not going to. Right. The next one is going to be Alexa. Right. That's going to be the endowed chair. Is going to be an android, a cyborg, and another name you could add to it, Donna Haraway. She's the one that was she belongs amongst this mafia here, right? Donna Haraway, who was theorizing and she's in literature. She's theorizing that it's going to be a cyborgian world, and supposedly she's a feminist, right? None of these people have picked up on it. I'm telling you, giving you the names because I've been watching these people and being attacked from, and their undergraduate students attacked by them for the past 20, 25 years. They were sending in these women with the extreme tattoos and the piercings and the multicolored hair into my class in sexuality to try to sweat me. I think I've talked about it in other presentation, so I'm not going to belabor the point. So I know what I'm talking about. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. I've experienced the brunt of it, and I paid for it professionally. Again, don't feel sorry for me, because you know what? I have a live audience right now, and I have large numbers of people who are watching my casts. And with your assistance, ladies and gentlemen, the Professor Hamamoto channel is going to do the Zatoichi of academia, and it's going to destroy CRT and critical gender studies, all of that bogus stuff. And it's going to be replaced by literature, the classics, music, the arts, the humanities that's pro-human instead of anti-human. All right, that's my pitch. And also my prognostication for the future. The future looks really good because these people are beginning to lose steam. All right. One power couple who are in the mafia who are not mentioned in any of these books, right? And I think this person here should be at the forefront. Her name is Anne Fausto Sterling. She's another Jewish American, although she probably says she's an atheist. She comes from a Sabbatean Frankist immigrant Central European group trying to escape the pogroms. I'm sure her grandfather, grandparents, or maybe great grandparents have that history. But so she's got the millenarian streak going for the Sabbatean, and she's at Brown University. She might be retired now. She's from Queens. That's a tip off. She's a nice Jewish girl from Queens, right? Who went to Brown. She went to Ivy League on Brown University. It was founded by a Goy Protestant slave owner named Brown. In fact, if you go to Providence, which I had a girlfriend who was going to med school there. If you go to Providence, you will see the hitching post where they used to tie their slaves down. I shouldn't be laughing, but they finally took them down, by the way, because it was too embarrassing. And you got RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, close by, and you got Newport. We visited where the real hereditary wealth is and all that. Eye opener for me, a hick from California, right? And here's Fausto Serling. She's the person who did pioneering studies in intersex, supposedly, another fake construction, to use her own term. And here's her partner. Her name's Paula Voigt, another probably Sabbatean Frankist, come from that bloodline. Paula Vogel, whose parents probably came from the Austria, another German Jew who came to America or were kicked out or set up a franchise here. And she's a playwright. She's a Pulitzer Prize winning play that they live together. She teaches at Brown too. And so any undergraduate who goes into their courses naturally is going to defer to them, not knowing that they have this incredible ugly Sabbatean heritage, and going down to Count Cagliostro, the Freemasonic. You've got the Sabbateans in London as well. They migrated all over the world, and I'm trying to figure out if they managed to colonize aspects. Putin has kicked them out of Russia, right? The oligarchs, and I know he still works with some of them, but for the most part, they removed them and they went to where? Ukraine, right? Because Ukraine is historically one of the geographic centers of and Poland as well. In fact, Jakub Frank was Polish Jewish, who later became a Muslim and then became a Roman Catholic because he didn't really care about he didn't care about Judaism. He cared about Satan, and these people were Satanists. They were Luciferians. They were against God. And I'll conclude, I'm running out of time here, and I'm going to give him more extended treatment later. And this is very strange, right? And this does not constitute an endorsement. This is just something for us to think about, you and me both, especially me. But a lot of my thoughts became clarified and crystallized by a best-selling author. His name's Jonathan Cahn, and he is a rabbi by training, I believe. He certainly he knows Hebrew enough to translate it, original Hebrew into English. He's a scholar, so I suspect that he got a lot of rabbinical training. He's not a theologian as such, like an academic scholar, but he's been through the training process, just like a Jesuit would, or somebody who's in higher level of the clergy, right? So this is his most recent. I don't know if it's his most recent. There's a second volume. It's called The Harbinger. And he takes it right back down to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 10, about Israel and, of course, America falling away from God and allowing all manner of abominations to fill this vacuum created by science in the secularization process, the philosophical materialist perspective that I alluded to early on, that even people like good, honest thinkers like Matt Taibbi have fallen trapped to, or Kara Dansky, right? She probably doesn't identify as a Jew. She's fallen away from the temple. Big mistake. Taibbi, I don't know what his background is, but they've accepted a purely materialist understanding of what life is on in our universe. So I'm going to be. This is just kind of a preview. seriously doing a critique of his work here, and I never thought I would, because I read the first one, the Shemitah. I might be mispronouncing it, and I just thought it was a lot of, because but I also read a lot of the Christian evangelical literature too, because that's what I do. I want to see what people are reading, what they're doing, how they're responding to it. So I still have to get a handle on it, but I do agree with him that what we're seeing today is a manifestation of a fall, right? Josephus wrote about it, right? Flavius Josephus, right? He was a Jew, by the way. He was a Roman who joined the Roman Empire and wrote it. He's typically noted as the first modern historian, and he wrote the book called The Jewish War and talks about the fall of the first temple in 70 Anno Domini. I'm not using common era, I'm saying AD 70. That's the destruction of the first Jewish temple. We might be seeing the destruction of the current temple right now. Anyway, that's where I'll leave it today, ladies. And that's a lot to digest for now. I'm going to be hearkening back to some of the elements that I put in here, but the big takeaway point here is that do not fear what you are seeing in the form of CRT and drag queen story time is a sort of a trivial manifestation of that, and gender fluidity. This is already on the way out because good does prevail, but our people suffer for lack of knowledge, right? If you don't know where this is coming from and the historical roots of people like a Judith Butthead and Jack Halberstam and Fausto Sterling and her partner, as they call him, Paula Vogel, if you do not understand what their agenda is and what they represent, then we, because you're taking me down with you, then we're doomed, right? Because the whole millenarian apocalyptic vision of this cult is to take down everybody, right? So, well, supposedly they're all going to go to heaven, and they're going to go. They're taking us with them, right? Supposedly. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, I'm exhausted. I think I need a drink of water, and I'll see you on Tuesday, God willing. Thank you. Godspeed. Blessings to every one of you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it. Bye. We'll see you soon.